Hi guys, my name is Rachel Tate and I am the mother of a special needs little girl named Lulu Tate who was 3 going on 4 years old during the pandemic. During this time, she participated in the speech and language pathology program and was receiving 6 hours of special education services a week. Lulu is also a student that is diagnosed with hyperhip dysplasia and has to wear a 12-hour brace in order to help her hip bone go back into its socket. Just to show you guys an example, this is her brace that she has to wear for at least 12 hours a day in order for her to make progress in her walking skills. As we continue to move forward, it is my hope that you adhere and help the special education population get back into the school buildings to access the services that they need. I can tell you of many families that have struggled throughout this pandemic, and especially those that are in discrete programs that need extra support, such as occupational therapy, speech therapy, vision services, etc. I can tell you stories about little kids that have extreme autism with behaviors and that are nonverbal that have regressed at really high rates due to not having the behavior interventions that they need on a consistent basis with trained, qualified people. Thank you for taking the opportunity and the time to hear my story. I appreciate everything that you guys do.
I'm not going to do all of them. I'm not going to do it. I'm just not. I'm just not. You gonna go for a walk?
Hi, my name is Mary Beth McGowan. I am a parent of a first grader at Woodacres Elementary School. And just first off, thank you for convening this meeting to finally give a voice to families like ours with children with special needs that have been severely impacted by the prolonged distance learning. As I mentioned, I have a first grader, a son with Down syndrome, and we've really been impacted in multiple ways due to the ongoing distance learning situation. Our son is a child who just has a love for learning. He enjoys going to school. That is where he gets his social interaction. He's a real people person, and that is how he learns, from modeling his peers and interacting one-on-one with his teachers and therapists. So for his sole interaction to be via computer has been very detrimental to his academic performance, as well as his behavior, which we have seen regress. He has directly communicated his feelings of isolation and loneliness, which is just completely heartbreaking. He uses a speech output device, essentially an iPad, to help with his language delay. And on his device, he has written lonely, angry, school, and then the names of his classmates. He's fallen behind his peers academically, even more so than under normal circumstances. So to help alleviate the academic disparity, we have had to take on financial burden to hire an outside tutor, in addition to hiring someone to oversee him during the entire virtual learning day, because both myself and his father have had to maintain our full-time jobs. It is a true struggle to have children with special needs be in front of a computer for the hours that they are expected to, and to sit there to cooperate. And keeping this up over the past 10 months has been difficult, to say the least, and it is truly, truly unsustainable going forward. So we ask that policymakers and educators bring elementary school students, especially those with IEPs, back into the schools immediately for in-person instruction. Data demonstrates that this can be done safely, and we have seen it happening safely in other school districts around the country. Montgomery County must take this action now, and the school district must fulfill its role as educators. The well-being of your constituents demands you take this action now.
Thanks for this opportunity to provide testimony, including something our son wrote that we will read. Our son Gabe's experience with distance learning started in 8th grade in the Magnet Math, Science, and Computer Science program at Tacoma Park Middle School, and ended about 2 months into 9th grade at Blair High School. Gabe has a very complex profile, including severe ADHD, some autism, and slow processing with particular issues with auditory processing. When he was attending school in person, he used an FM system assistive audio device to help him understand the teacher. He also has some very substantial academic gifts, including testing levels above 99.9% in math and spatial relations, with nearly as high level in some other areas. He's an incredibly original, creative thinker who loves learning, and it would be a pity if the educational system wiped out that love of learning. But this is what happened. With a mental health emergency on our hands, we are now homeschooling Gabe and are not sure whether or when he can return to MCPS.
As the parents of a child with disabilities, we found that the distance learning plan we received initially was wholly inadequate, and we were not able to get any improvement in it prior to when we withdrew Gabe from school. In fact, there were only 2 changes that were proposed to Gabe's IEP to address the issues of distance learning. 1, under accommodations, they proposed changing reduce distractions to self to reduce distractions to self by working to establish quiet, dedicated workspace at home. 2, under supplementary aids, they proposed changing preferential seating to preferential seating, collaborate with student on flexible seating options in the home to reduce distractions. In both cases, these changes put the responsibility on the parents, not the school, despite the fact that most of Gabe's problems with distance learning were caused by the way the school implemented it. For today's purposes, Gabe was not comfortable putting himself out there on video, which makes a lot of sense given the possible longevity of the video and places it could appear. However, he wrote up a list of points about the distance learning where, as a student with disabilities, he got to a difficult place. A big point for him, however, is that the things that were bad for him are bad for all students to some degree, so fixing them will positively impact all students, and that's something he wants to see happen. So with that, we'd like to close by letting Gabe describe in his own words his difficulties with distance learning.
1. All of the assignments were in different places. They didn't establish a good way to be able to interact with them. 2. It was difficult to realize when classes started because there were no bells or notifications. I wrote a Fortran program to play a sound when class started, but a lot of people can't do that. 3. While we were using Zoom, a lot of teachers were difficult to understand because the microphones and internet connection weren't great. When MCPS tells us to enable our video, it makes things much worse because video takes up significantly more bandwidth, which makes the audio quality even worse. This makes it incredibly difficult to learn anything because you can't hear what is going on. 4. It's also hard to understand your classmates when you go into breakout sessions. Some have decent microphones and internet connections, but most people don't. 5. It was very difficult to pay attention to the teachers because you're trying to pay attention for hours a day. That's very difficult and exhausting. With distance learning, as opposed to in-person school, there's very little going on other than having to listen to a teacher you can't understand.
6. Homework was more tedious under distance learning. Finding it was an issue. It wasn't easy to find, and the quantity increased. It just never seemed to end. If you found that you had nothing left to do, you knew there was probably something wrong, and you were probably missing something. There was never a clear agenda of what homework assignments had to be done for each class. You just had to find them. 7. Teachers would sometimes use an online tool that no one had ever learned to use. The number of online tools they would use definitely increased. 8. In math, the homework backlog was prevalent, and it was very difficult to show your work. It's way worse when you have to do it online, not on paper. You also had to watch very long videos. I can't watch through hour-long videos consistently because of my attention span, and I can't deal with a backlog of videos to watch. 9. The teachers did try to help with the backlog, but by that point it was too late. 10. School was by far the worst part of the day, and it took up a significant amount of your time. It is very difficult to put in the effort for something you find completely unbearable.
Thank you for listening.
Our son is 7 years old and in first grade. He was diagnosed with autism at 2. He's very smart, he's funny, he's friendly. He also has difficulty with transitions. He struggles to manage his emotions, so frustration can often spiral into meltdowns. He gets easily distracted. He gets anxious when his world lacks structure, and sometimes social interactions can take a little work. From the age of 2, he attended a preschool that essentially taught children like my son how to attend school. It was not an easy road for anyone, but he worked really hard, and in 2019, he entered kindergarten in a typical classroom, and he was having an amazing year. Our son is part of MCPS's inclusion model, so he attends his neighborhood school. This can be great for kids like mine because he learns really well by watching peers, but he does still need support in the classroom, and those supports are what make up his IEP. The teacher has to find ways to connect and bond to my son. It's not hard to do, but it takes some special attention. The teacher prepares him for transition so he doesn't get upset about having to stop what he's doing, redirects him when he's distracted, creates positive reinforcement so when things get hard, as they do in the classroom, he doesn't melt down, and checks in to make sure he knows what the rules are and knows when their daily routine is changing. And throughout the day, the teacher will monitor him for small signs of frustration to prevent a meltdown that could derail the whole class if it goes full blown. It's a lot, but that's the model that's in place for kids like mine, and so that's what the teachers do. And it was working for our son last year. He loved his teacher. He made tons of friends, and he was excelling academically. This year, he started first grade online in September, and it's been disastrous. He never formed a connection to his teacher or his classmates. He never understood the rules of this new online environment because it changed constantly. He was distracted by tools like Cami, and he couldn't keep up with what the teacher was doing, and he didn't know how to ask for help. On Zoom, the teacher could never provide the types of supports that were on his IEP, and he was constantly frustrated, and he had hours of meltdowns a day. We were suddenly back in the days when he was first diagnosed, when our house felt like a war zone. In October, we told the school that we couldn't have him in Zoom classes any longer. No alternatives were provided, like small group instruction or a short-term aid. Nothing was done to try to keep him in class. The school did agree to not mark him absent so that we didn't have to unenroll him and risk losing his IEP, but that was it. No one at his school checks in to see how he's doing. Today we're teaching him basic math as best we can, but he's struggling with some of the concepts. He's not reading at grade level. We've hired tutors, and we're lucky to be able to afford that, but it means we can't provide other things that his doctor recommends, like occupational therapy and social skills groups to support his social and emotional development. He misses being in school, and so we're still dealing with behavioral regression and meltdowns, but not as severe as when he was attending Zoom classes. He's happier now, and our family doesn't feel like it's in crisis, but he's not learning what he needs to. A big concern I have is that no one's watching him. I know a lot about my son's challenges at home, but his teachers don't know him. I see him struggle with new concepts in math and reading, and it may be due to innate differences in the way he processes information. I have no idea, but I know that early intervention works, and that we've already lost a year of having anyone qualified watching my son. So a year of intervention time has been lost. My son's needs in an online learning environment are very different than in person. He can be successful, but he needs different supports, and no one was willing to augment his IEP after he began unraveling. I feel like the school and the district gave up on my child, not because they didn't care, but because they don't know what to do for him, because the inclusion model was not designed for this, and they don't have the resources in his home school to figure it out. And so they do nothing in the hopes that everything can be fixed once we're back in the classroom. But that's not good enough.
My name is Karen Reyes, and I'm the mother to 3 sons who are MCPS students. 2 have IEPs, and 1 has a 504 plan. Prolonged distance learning has affected each of my sons in different ways. My oldest is angry, not motivated, and failing some classes because he is not getting the same support through his IEP that he got in person. My 7th grader is struggling the most mentally and emotionally. He has become depressed and hates Zoom. His behavior has changed, and he is rarely happy anymore. My 3rd grader is not getting the same support he used to through his IEP, and he is regressing. He requires a one-to-one to access the curriculum, and even though he has a virtual one-to-one, I have to be the in-person support MCPS refuses to provide. I am exhausted from having to be split in 3 ways trying to help each of them, and I don't know how much longer we can do this.
Hi, my name is Dana Chan, and I am the parent of a son who has Down syndrome. I had hoped that one day my son would have the necessary skills and education to find his path in the world, but that's not going to happen with extended virtual school. Most notably for me, MCPS, is you never even tried to address supporting this community. There is a reason we think our teachers, paras, and therapists as superheroes. For 10 months now, you've asked us to be a parent, para, educator, therapist, friend, IT support, media specialist, lunch cook, recess aide, and calendar keeper daily. all roles that parents of children with disabilities have to fully encompass every day. You continue to ask us daily to choose between our jobs that pay our bills and providing school support for our children. Once the private schools started to open with little incident, you could have tried small pods inside with windows and doors opened, or small pods outside. This could have been a time where MCPS became a national leader to show other counties across the state and the US what can be done. You could have formed intervention teams with a focus on reading, writing, and math while integrating social skills, movement, and therapies. You could have reached out to organizations like the Down Syndrome Network of Montgomery County to gather feedback and ideas. It would have been far better to have tried and failed than do nothing. You could have tried but didn't, leaving our pleas for help unanswered. The saddest part for me, MCPS, is that you are essentially forcing the intellectually disabled population into moving off the diploma track and into alternative learning outcomes. This leads me to think that maybe this was your goal all along. The intellectually disabled population was already struggling and fighting for supports pre-pandemic. And now, having lost almost a year of interventions, accommodations, and therapies, our kids regressing beyond the ability for them to catch up, parents are now faced with decisions like repeating grades, moving off the diploma track, and placement in special contained programs. Of course we are upset. The world is stacked against our children, and it was unfair to turn away from the children who need school services the most. Our pediatrician, worried about our son's regression, atypical behaviors, and mental health, urged us to find an in-person therapy practice. So we did. He went there 3 days a week for 2 months, but this practice is out of network, and as you can probably imagine, even after our benefits reimbursements, our out-of-pocket costs are extremely high and not sustainable. This is unfortunate because continuation of these therapies are even more important as therapists were providing not only therapeutic benefits, but social, emotional, mental, physical, and tactile supports as well. For the first time in months, our son was happy, motivated, and engaged. At this point, I'm doubtful the basic goals ahead for my son before graduating elementary school will be attainable by MCPS. Our kids will need private and intense tutoring, therapies, and interventions, all of which come with a large price tag. My understanding is Montgomery County was recently given $112 million, which can be used to address learning losses for students. If MCPS plans on actively objecting to a return to in-person school in a meaningful and productive way, and does not have substantial plans for remediation for the community of students with special needs, then please at least consider providing parents funding to supplement our children's needs with schools, therapies, tutors, and practices that are open, willing, and able to provide services. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Allison Wool, and I'm a mom to 2 boys in MCPS. One is in 8th grade and the other who is in 5th grade. And I'm here to talk about my son in 5th grade because he has Down syndrome. And he was having a great year last year in 4th grade. He was really thriving, learning, happy, even in the school play. And then literally a week later, COVID hit and his whole world ended. And I know that's the same for many kids. But for a child who with an intellectual developmental disability, that is a really completely devastating situation. Once he got set up on distance learning in late April, it became clear very quickly that this was not a model that was going to work for him. He's not able to process what happens over a screen. He really requires the support of his team in person. He has a paraprofessional, a special educator, an occupational therapist, a speech therapist, and most importantly, his peers. He learns a great deal from his peers, and the model of inclusion in general education has just been an absolute life changer for him, especially as he gets a little bit older and all kids are really supported and also influenced by their peers. He has had a really difficult time online. We are desperate to have him back in the classroom and not to have a teacher on a screen, but to actually have support and teachers in person so that he can continue to learn. You know, when you have a child with a developmental disability, you work so hard for so long for very small, what seem like small gains to typical families or typical children. And Julian has been working with therapists since he was 9 weeks old. So to see him go backwards socially and academically has been just devastating. It's really hard for him to cope. He's a good-natured guy, but he's managed to pick a lot of the hair out of his head. It's really hard to watch. So I really hope that we will see him back in person in class as soon as possible. Thank you.